It's being live streamed. So hopefully on this occasion, yeah, there you go. It's opening up. It's about to, I'm just noticing we're about to go live. So I will turn that off and we'll come back here and make my screen bigger. Good. Well, hopefully now we can do this without interruptions. Because actually we're ready as we do our walk through Matthew. Oh, I should say anyone who has just joined us on either Facebook or YouTube, you're very welcome. If you ever want to join the Zoom, look in the link below. You can kind of get the login information if you want to join the Zoom discussion. But this is actually, I have to say, is for me is one of the kind of key passages in all of the Gospels that we're starting off with today. I mean, we're not going to do it all in one go, but we're just beginning to get now. We're taking 3 chapters. We're going to look at the Sermon on the Mount, and the Sermon on the Mount is really. I think I remember seeing the psychologist Jordan Peterson referring to it as the pinnacle of the entire Bible. So the pinnacle of the New Testament, but actually therefore of the entire entire Bible. Now he's not really a believer, in the kind of a traditional sense, but actually here he is referring to this passage that we're just beginning to get into as actually the pinnacle, and it is a quite remarkable and exceptional piece of writing. And without taking away in any sense from the role of Jesus in the mix, we also owe a big gratitude to the way Matthew has structured it, because you can see the evidence as we go through it that Matthew has actually put his own organizational imprimatur on the text. And so some of the way we understand the Sermon on the Mount is actually part of the way that Matthew has organized it to help it make sense to us. So we've got this remarkable piece we're going to look at, which covers 3 chapters. Today we're just going to look at the introduction, the first kind of 10 verses. So actually, just to do a quick advertisement, on the 21st of this month, I'm starting 10 weeks of evening teaching. If anyone wants to join from there, it'll be a lot longer, where we look at all of the themes that are outlined in the Beatitudes, which Jesus then picks up through the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. We unpack them from the point of view of a developmental psychology, because it's a mistake to understand that, in one sense, it's a mistake to understand these simply as kind of propositions to adhere to or not. If we try to make them propositions we adhere to, we will all fail against them. But if they become kind of aspirations that we work towards and develop on, actually what you find is life grows and expands and has a better quality to it. So I'm making a big statement when I say that, but I 100% believe it. We're going to take the 10 weeks doing it. We're not going to spend anything like that in this session. We're going to look at them much more in overview, which is not to shortchange them, because actually sometimes you see things in the overview that you can lose when you get bogged down in the detail. So let's kind of get moving into the actual text. So we had, if you remember last time, Matthew had set up, he'd given us a summary of what's going to happen with Jesus traveling all over Samaria, and multitudes and crowds. And we know from Luke that there's already a bit of a crowd when he first arrives in Capernaum. And so actually, although we didn't hear that from, so we know there are crowds even when Jesus first turns up, although they're going to get even bigger. So Matthew kind of picks that up. Having seen the crowds, he went up the mountain and sat down, and his disciples came to him. Now, when we get right to the end of the text of Matthew, Jesus is going to be talking as if he's talking to crowds. And in one sense, that already is giving us a little bit of a clue. Actually, what I can do, so you can read the text. I can make myself smaller. But actually, Matthew starts this, and he kind of symbolically has Jesus going up a mountain. Now, this is a real thing that really happened. You get a sense of that, particularly if you read the account in Luke, who has Jesus disappearing off to a quiet place in the morning to pray. It's the same kind of period. And so there is a kind of a rise just outside of Capernaum that kind of goes up. So you can imagine how, in this context where Jesus had quite a busy the day before, we don't get the order from Matthew, but we pick it up from Luke and Mark, where he's healed the paralytic in the synagogue. He's healed Peter's mother-in-law. In the evening, people are bringing crowds to him, and he's healing them. So having seen all of that, he goes up early the next morning up the mountain. He sat down, and his disciples came to him. Now, Matthew's only told us about the calling of 4 disciples, but they were symbolic. They were just to say there's already a group of folks who aren't just listening to what Jesus is saying as kind of as an audience, but are wanting to engage with him as a rabbi. So it's those are the folks who come up to him, and Jesus, he spoke and taught them, saying. And what Matthew's going to do is he's actually going to summarize if you like, the personally internalized moral and ethical teaching of Jesus, which he really delivers to those who want to come up the mountain with him, if I can put it that way. So this is not the same. We often like, because we learn it from school days, stories of Jesus, the parables. That's how he speaks to the multitudes. This is much more challenging and is much more about those who are kind of coming up the mountain, if I can put it that way. So he spoke to them, saying, we're going to run into it, but there's more going on in what Matthew is doing, because by setting this thing on the mountain, Matthew is presenting Jesus in a sense like Moses. And we already know that Moses has prophesied that there's going to be a prophet who comes after him. And actually, the words that Moses uses says there's a prophet who's going to come like me, who's coming after me, and he says you should listen to him. So the qualification that Moses gives to the prophet who comes after them is the phrase "listen to him." And actually, we find that phrase in the mouth of God actually later on in Matthew's gospel, when it speaks out of the cloud and says, "This is my son, listen to him," if you remember. So Matthew is kind of conscious of the fact that he sees Jesus already. He's anticipating Jesus to be this prophet who comes after. And so he's presenting him up on the mountain. The crowds go up. Jesus starts now speaking. So Jesus is now, in one sense, giving an equivalent of the 10 Commandments. But he does it with this strange technique, which actually incorporates the book of Psalms. So here's Jesus going up a mountain, looking like Moses, or at least the prophet who comes after Moses. And he speaks, because if you think about how the Psalms start, blessed is the man. I mean, so Matthew actually takes the opening statement, which actually clearly Jesus said, because we get similar blessed statements in Luke. So it clearly is part of the formula, the way Jesus speaks it. And he delivers 8 statements of things that are blessed. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We quickly go through these, and I'll come back and explain why. Blessed are those who mourn, because they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, because they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, because they'll be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, because they'll be called sons of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, sometimes you'll see in lists, people add the next verse, because then Jesus says, now blessed are you when people persecute you. But actually, blessed are you is a different formula. It's blessed are those is the formula. Blessed are the people who are like this. And blessed are you is where Jesus starts to turn the summary around and starts to work it into the lives of his disciples. But again, I think Matthew is being incredibly subtle in what he does. He's taken this real incident, which marks the start of Jesus's teaching to those who want to gather around him. Up until the last chapter, we didn't have any disciples. Jesus was just a teacher. Suddenly he's called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John symbolically to be with him. And that little group, and there's probably more as well, as we're going to see, because just Matthew doesn't put them all in the same order, who are kind of gathering around him. Now Matthew is going to present, what is it he teaches those who want to get close to him? So in this sense, Matthew then pulls all of Jesus's kind of internal personal development teaching into one pack, and we call it the Sermon on the Mount. And we don't get so much of that kind of ethical internal teaching in the rest of Matthew's teaching sections. And the next thing Matthew's going to teach is about how to do missions. Then he's going to teach about how the kingdom works. And these are a bit more general kind of things. So he packs all of this kind of quite deep psychologically sophisticated, as we're going to see, teaching into this single sermon. And probably the truth is that all of this first mission trip that Jesus takes around Galilee, which Matthew's going to spell out for us, Jesus is presumably revisiting these subjects and taking them deeper and deeper. And as John says, if we try to fill the world with try to write down everything Jesus ever taught, we would fill the world with the books. So Matthew is giving us, if you like, the précis. Here's the summary, which he does in 8 blessed statements. He then gives an example of how Jesus unpacks it for them. But there is, if you like, a process which is then extended when Jesus gets in chapter 10 of Matthew to do what we call the mission sermon, that this is something we're taking out all over the world. And actually right at the heart of it, I want you to see, is personal growth and development. It's taking humanity to a higher level. That makes sense. And final bit while I'm on this kind of roll is the other thing that Matthew does is he presents it in terms of 8 statements. And the reason, and they all start with the word blessed, and that's because if you look in Deuteronomy, I've just written this up in the next little Old Testament book I'm writing. The end of giving the 10 commandments and unpacking them all, so there's more than 10. God says, now when you finish all of this, if you live totally like this, then you will be, and then he has a verse which has the word blessed in it 8 times, and it's an eightfold blessing. And so there is a mental association that got created between the idea of the prophet who's coming after Moses, who's going to come because somehow we've completed what Moses has given us, and actually somehow tied up with the completion of what Moses has given us is an eightfold blessing. Now, the blessings are kind of blessed in the field, blessed in the home, blessed in the whatever. They're not quite the same as these blesseds are, but can you get the feel that Matthew is kind of presenting this eightfold blessing? And one of the things I find fascinating as you look at this is Matthew does what we in modern psychology we refer to now as reframing our situation. Is he takes a bunch of negative situations and says, tell you what, see yourself now as blessed when this is happening. See yourself not now as, oh dear, I'm beaten down, I'm terrible, but actually I'm blessed because I'm being persecuted for righteousness. So don't kind of get into a victim mentality. Start to understand my security and my endorsement and the favor of God on me in a strange way, that when I'm picked on for being too honest, there's a good thing because I've got something of access to heaven in that. Or if I kind of run through the 8 again, let's bring them back. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So I feel really crushed and whatever, but don't worry, you are blessed because even in your crushedness, you have the kingdom of heaven to hand. And we see Jesus is going to unpack this theme further as we go through the gospel. So you get towards the end of this the way Matthew records the sermon, we hear about ask and it will be given to you, knock and you will have it open to you. Do you know why? Because your God is like a father who's not just like a father, an earthly father who might give a stone when their kids ask for bread, but he's a good father who gives good things to those who come and ask him, you see. So it doesn't matter if you feel small and crushed and childlike, because actually you have access to that kingdom level. And he goes on, blessed are those who mourn because they will be comforted. Hebrew mourning isn't just about death, it's about what's wrong with the world. You find this through the wisdom literature. But Jesus does actually kind of address those earthly things. He says, don't be anxious for tomorrow. Everybody's anxious for tomorrow. You can't actually extend your life, mourning, being aware of death. You can't by your anxiety. Okay, so what does it mean when we're going to say, so don't worry too much about it, don't mourn, because you will be comforted. And then he kind of gives you those examples. You see how he unpacks further on. So this summary statement is then unpacked later as we kind of go further. Blessed are the meek, because they'll inherit the earth. I mean, it's interesting. A lot of modern translations use the word gentle, and I'm not so keen on that. We don't know the word meek because we don't use it nowadays. But the ancient world often talked about meekness. It was seen as a Greek virtue, but they meant something. The best way of understanding meekness is kind of non-arrogant. It's kind of self-aware. it's about knowing your strengths, but being in control of them. So a good example is even in modern Greek, a horse that has been broken and tamed is a meek horse. It can be used for war and done all sorts of things, but it's something like its strength is under control. It's got discipline. So there's discipline around the strengths. So you're not just kind of all over the place because I'm such a powerful person, but somehow it's those who have somehow brought control to those passions and those things that actually allow them to drive forwards. So those kinds of people, they are the kind who inherit the earth. And actually it is a very true statement, not just of the Christian world, but of the secular world, that actually alpha males tend not to be bullies. They tend to be people who've learned to control their power, their strength. And actually and those are the kinds of people that actually people want to follow, and they benefit from following, if that makes sense. So I'm not taking away the spiritual dynamic, but I'm just showing you that actually there's quite a broad truth here. It doesn't just work because you're a Christian, if I can put it that way. So actually, if we're thinking of a verse that kind of touches on that, Jesus talks about not laying up treasures on earth, and actually, and he talks about the generous eye. That actually that people aren't kind of grabby and trying to consume, but actually have got their stuff in order. Are people who actually are generous, people want to be with. They're not trying to just accumulate their own power base and so on. They're actually doing something useful with it. They're conscious of how what they're doing is sowing for a future they may not experience. That's the kind of meekness that is in view here. So blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, because they'll be filled. And Jesus does quite a long passage about traditional things to do with righteousness, like praying, fasting, and so on. So when you fast, so you're hungering and thirsting, but you're doing something righteous. This is how you should do it. But actually, the wonderful thing is, if you are like that, if it's important to you in God's economy, in God's kingdom, he's going to satisfy you. Because actually, one of the sad things is, if you try and do it without the spiritual dimension to this, is actually you are never satisfied by your own self-righteousness. There's something kind of wonderful in the story we've got, that actually we find a satisfaction because we discover it actually that God has supplied for it, if I can put it those ways. So Jesus covers those things like prayer and fasting, but actually if we want to live a righteous life, we don't need to struggle and strive over it. God wants to make it achievable for us. He wants us to know that it's going to be something satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And of course, we hear, you heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, but now I'm saying to you, turn the other cheek. That's Jesus unpacking what he means. So you can see all of this summary statement is a bit like, here's my mnemonic, at the front. What makes you happy? I can remember this as a kid. This is the kind of quality Bible teaching I got as a kid, but I remember it today, so it must have worked. Jesus first, other selves next, yourselves last, spells joy. So, this is kind of Jesus's mnemonic. It's a bit more sophisticated than that. But blessed, 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 blessed. I'm going to reframe that. You think merciful is a big strain, but you know what? Do it for your own sake. Actually, there's a verse for that in the Old Testament. God says, for my own sake, I will forgive you. See, I'm showing you that actually you can do it because you recognize, as you're being merciful, there's something of grace that comes to you. So he's reframing something that people might think, I don't want to do it. I don't want to be that person. But he's actually saying, you know what, you're blessed. God notices you. He's involved with you as he looks. Blessed are the pure in heart, because they will see God. You've heard about, and he actually quotes, although we don't recognize it, he's quoting from some of the rabbinic arguments about what constitutes adultery. Because we like to think how morally pure everybody was, but actually they had the rabbis had debates on who it was okay to have had non-marital sex with, and who it counted, and what real adultery and what's forgivable and what isn't. And Jesus actually kind of references that when he answers this question and says, but you know what, even when you're looking at someone lustfully, actually there's something going on in your heart. You see, he's taking this idea, purity of heart, simplicity, keep it straightforward, don't get sophisticated, multi-layered. Actually, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in your thought life when you're doing that shows that you're totally not pure in heart. But let's turn it into that. How do we get there? Blessed are the peacemakers, because they will be called sons of God. And I think this is such a powerful statement for today. I think almost everyone in their workplace, we need to kind of go in with the mindset of I can be a peacemaker, because you will 100% guaranteed be working with people who diametrically have learned to see people who disagree with them as morally inferior and evil, if I can put it that way. That's the way we're training people now. That's the way we're kind of going through. So, if you voted Conservative, you are an evil fascist, okay? And if you voted Labour, then you're an evil Marxist. So it's kind of like that's the way the world sees each other now. There's no understanding of priority, nuance, or those kind of layers. And so actually, it just needs people who know how to moderate and connect and help people make peace. I find one of the things I'm most connected to at the moment is about situations where there's conflict, and maybe you could get involved. The problem is when someone says maybe you could get involved, they're normally representing one side, and therefore I'm all instantly seen as being supportive of them, because that's the way the world is. But it needs people who can bridge those gaps. So Jesus, Jesus says, make friends with your enemy before you get to court. If you think about it, he unpacks that process. And he makes it very personal. There's a cost to doing this when you do it unilaterally. But that is the structure of the Sermon on the Mount, is what you're going to do unilaterally, how you're going to move forward. And then blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So we've breezed through those 8. And I really want to leave them as thoughts. But just it struck me a few years back. So I've actually created, I normally just put the text up, but I put these 2 slides in because I know that I always forget. It's easier for me to read them than it is to remember them. But there's a kind of a fascinating sort of flow of personal growth. And actually, if you hear that, that's my proposition really, is that the Sermon on the Mount isn't a bunch of things to say, yes, I believe in that, I believe in that. It's actually an agenda for my personal development and growth. And that's why it's the first thing that Jesus teaches to his disciples before they even go and do mission, because you haven't got any mission if you don't know how to change people. And we love the miracles, but actually the point of the miracle is it's not the norm. If you think the miracle is the norm, it's not a miracle anymore. Does that make sense? The norm is that God wants to involve us in the process because he actually honors us and recognizes our authority. So here it comes. So there's a kind of an interesting flow of this growth. So it starts with, there has to be a kind of conscious awareness of our poverty of spirit. We have to know we need to change. That is one of the biggest headaches when people think they can bust you in, because I do some of this. It's kind of like, you should talk to these folks, but actually you meet people who don't think they do at all, and it makes no sense to them whatsoever. So unless you're already aware that you can't do this yourself, I need some help on this, you're not going to step out on the journey. So that kind of so that's Beatitude 1. So that leads to a sober kind of I've got to remind myself. So blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn. There's a kind of sober self-awareness. I know I'm not what I should be. And there's then a dependence on receiving. I can't change anything. That goes with that. I'm not going to try and build up my treasures on heaven and so on. So we kind of let me just quickly run back so I can remind, because while I'm talking, so we've gone blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, and blessed are the meek. If you see, so that kind of heart attitude that you kind of come in with as you kind of go into it, and you put those kind of bits together, it creates a hunger for God's transformation. So now suddenly in the middle, actually, if you hunger and thirst to get this right. So we've kind of gone through that, soberly putting things into perspective, recognizing my poverty, recognizing my need for help to achieve those things, recognizing it's not going to be done in the earthly ways by striving after wealth and power and so on. And actually in that, as I get hungry, there's this kind of promise of satisfaction. So it's right in the middle. So those with hunger and thirst for righteousness that produce then therefore a non-judgmental, non-self-promoting attitudes. Which we see in blessed are the merciful. Sorry, reminding myself, I always know I have to. Yeah, actually, and this would be, I would testify to this on a personal experience. which is, I started to internalize the Sermon on the Mount rather than just say I believe in it. Isn't it great? Fantastic. As I started to work through that process, you start to become aware of your own desperate limitations on these things, which means become much more gracious to those that you, when you see that in other people. So, you don't get so quick to try and remove the speck from your brother's eye when you're aware of the plank in your own, if I can put it that way. So it produces non-judgmental, a simplicity and authenticity of inner life. So your eye is good. You're looking to reconcile yourself, and you become a bit more of a peacemaker in those things. Ironically, I say ironically, it because it can sound now proud when you say it, that's not the thing. You don't want to overstate it, but hopefully I start to recognize this is one of the strengths I've now got in control. If I can put, it's not kind of become unnecessary pride. But as you get to be that kind of person, people find it much more easy to accept from you because they don't think you're going to control them so quickly. And so you do actually become much more of a peacemaker because you've gone through that non-judgmental. I recognize in me why I do this. And even to the point, I remember sitting with someone who had massive addiction issues. And I remember talking to him, and I haven't got his issues, but actually, because you understand them when you understand your own addictions, whether it's just like, my tendency to eat too many donuts and comfort eat. But actually, just those little hooks allowed him to feel like I understood what he was talking about, even though they were trivial. And if you put them in a piece of paper to say, I understand someone because I can never eat donuts, who's drug, no, I can't. But somehow those links and ability to connect them creates peace. But of course, as that becomes visible, there are two things that go on. One, sometimes people don't like it. So I lose track of the folks that you talk to who kind of go through a phase where people at first like them for being peacemaker, and then suddenly when they realize in many ways that they are beginning to give them a sense of their own need and poverty, suddenly they can turn. And so actually Jesus, when he unpacks it, says there's some things people like and there's some things they don't like about righteousness. Suddenly as it starts to give them a sense of actually I need to grow, I need to change. They hit a point where either they accept that humbly, meekly, or they react against it. And so you will inevitably find as you go through the journey that people turn sometimes as a kind of defense. And so it genuinely seems to happen. And I just thought it was really interesting that you kind of get that sort of sense of personal flow, which I personally have found is very real. And it's kind of woven in. And it brings home to me that the Sermon on the Mount really is a kind of it is the summary of what Jesus is saying for your personal transformation, and which we read in Paul, the Spirit takes responsibility for. Which is the wonderful way in which we don't have to have a 50-volume manual on this, because actually the Spirit can interpret and stretch us and lead us and connect us to the people we need. That's why Jesus didn't have to write absolutely everything down, because the Lord can regenerate it in the moment between those experiences when we need it. But as Paul writes in Romans, he, the Holy Spirit, understands the leanings of our heart and intervenes effectively. Entukchano, huper, in fact, the word is huper entukchano. He super intervenes. We write the word he intercedes, but the Greek is he super intervenes on our behalf because he gets us. He understands us. So that's my intro to the Sermon on the Mount. Hopefully that's kind of made sense at speed. I'll give the opportunity. Does anyone want to ask questions or make any comments at this stage? No?
Yeah, I think seeing each other as blessed with negative situations, that's a really important one. I think that's really important for now. I think as we've been in quite a negative situation at the moment, well, coming out of it at the moment, but still see ourselves as blessed.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't touch on it now, but there's research that shows that if you're naive and you do see the world that way, you do better in life. So in other words, if something like, something bad happens to you, you go, well, at least that didn't happen. Those kinds of folks tend to do better in life. So
that's interesting. That is.
Kristen, have you any thoughts on why 8 Beatitudes?
So did you miss the beginning? Did you?
I must have. Sorry.
Yeah, so there are 8 blessings which are promised for the fulfillment of the law in Deuteronomy.
Ah, okay.
So
I
there's a
understand.
statement at the end of Deuteronomy where God says, if you do this, this, and this, then you will be. And then 8 times it uses the word blessed. You sometimes don't see it in English because they translate some other words as blessed, which aren't the same word in Hebrew. But actually in the Hebrew, the word blessed appears 8 times. Blessed in the field, blessed in the home, blessed with your livestock, blessed with your
Yes.
relationships. And so it seems that there is and this is Matthew is clearly presenting this as Jesus as the prophet after Moses, which isn't going to come until there's something fulfilled. And when the things are fulfilled, there's an 8-fold blessing. And so although he's not explicit about it, because that would be a bit corny, I think as a scribe, because he's been trained scribally, he's from the tribe of Levi, he's aware of all of these things, and actually they've shaped how he's presented the teaching. For those who know and can see it, it's exciting, but you don't have to get it to fully understand Sermon on the Mount.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bob. Good. Any other questions? We're pretty much exactly hit half an hour.
So, Kristen, you talked about internalizing these, and I wonder what you mean by that.
Okay, so what I mean is that just actually the way the human brain worked, and therefore how things happen, is which we don't have to understand the neuroscience of it to kind of understand the emotional feeling of it. Is we tend to start the thing we have most control of is in the kind of neocortex, the logical thinking. And so we often apprehend teaching, first of all, at this level. Do I agree with it? Don't I agree with it? Yes, I like that. Tick, tick, tick. But things can stay there. They don't have to actually drop down into the more subconscious parts of the way your brain works. So a good example, totally not trivial and non-moral, is like when I learned to juggle. So you get 3 balls, and you kind of throw them up, and you're watching really carefully, and you kind of do this, and you maybe watch a video and they say, try and get a rhythm and da-da-da. And so you're trying to think it all through. But as time goes by, and particularly it happens as you sleep, so it takes time, it takes habit, and it takes rest. The things that you know up here start to kind of become part of who you are. So you have now that I think is generally true of things like this. So I think an awful lot of people hear the things, and virtue signaling is often a way of keeping real morality, pretending you're moral because you keep it up here. But when it's up here, it's not real deep morality. Because as soon as you lose cognitive energy to stay up here, the truth comes out. So you get an awful lot of a common phenomena, which is when someone gets older and they have less charisma and less energy, and you get the truth of who they are. Suddenly people think they're not half as nice as I thought they were. And that's very often, and again, when we do the long course that we're doing, I'll explain some of the science behind it. We can say, yeah, that is the case. But you can live morally out of the intellectual part of your brain, but that, as time goes on, that's going to find it harder and harder to keep up the facade. So now it's not bad that you do. It's better that you don't commit adultery than you do commit adultery. Okay, so it's not as bad if you're sitting there saying, I'm not committing adultery, but I'm really thinking about it all the time and I wish I could. But actually, you will be a nicer person if you've internalized and actually you've dropped to the point where you think, actually, it's not part of who I am. That's not something I want, and I'm not going to. And it may be invisible, but that only happens if you're deliberate about internalizing it. So that's not a very complete answer, I'm aware, Joe, because there's a massive thing here. If I sum up to say, one of my favorite pieces of research was a meta research on over 500 social psychology surveys, which concluded that social psychology should be called the science of moral hypocrisy, because 90% of people are living their morality up here, and actually it's not real. It's not really part of them. The good news is there are people who do. And when you look at how people actually genuinely become what they say they are, pretend they are, it's actually part of this process. It's a long-term process of internalizing, and that's part of what I think the Holy Spirit does with us. It's the way the Holy Spirit works with us, and it's not instant, barring the miracle, which can happen. but for most people, because of the way the Lord, the way I got into the mess I am is I made bad decisions over a long period of time. The way the Lord leads me out of that place is I have to make good decisions over a period of time. And he'll help me in it. He'll lead me in that. But that's the natural way to keep me human, and yet has got me to a new place. So the Holy Spirit is often helping us with those little choices, decisions, victories, marking them, doing the things that actually help me to for the truth that I want to espouse becoming the truth that actually is natural. But anyway, those are good questions, Joe. But yeah, anything else? Anyone else want to ask anything? No. At least I can see some. Well, no, actually, I can see a mix of faces. I can see a couple of smiling faces, some serious thinking faces. But so let's formally shut down the time. So I'll stop the live